Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. Welcome, everybody, to Spirituality Adventures. Thanks for tuning into this episode. I am so excited to interview Dr. Tina Schermer Sellers. And I actually heard of you when I was meeting with my female therapist after my huge meltdown a few years ago. I met with her. I still meet with her occasionally, but I met weekly with her like for a couple of years. And she recommended Sex, God, and the Conservative Church. And after I got my podcast going, I kept going, I'm going to try to get Tina on there, because I read it, loved it, and could relate so much to it because I grew up with a very conservative, shame-based sexual ethic. And then as a mega church pastor, we'll talk about this a little bit. But yeah, thank you, Tina, for joining us on Spirituality Adventures.
Thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here. This is going to be a lot of fun, Fred. So thanks for inviting me.
You bet. So let's get a little of your background just so our audience can kind of, relate to Did you grow up? What was your faith family background like? Just a quick intro to Tina and who you are.
So I don't think I realized it at the time, but I grew up in a really odd family and became a pretty odd person. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in a Swedish immigrant home. So my grandparents had immigrated to the United States, and in Sweden, in our lineage, there had been generations of sex positivity and body positivity. And so I talked about sexuality and bodies with every single one of my relatives at different times along the way. I mean, it was like talking about your favorite recipe or how to brush your teeth or whatever. It came up all the time, came up between adults. And I thought every family was like that. So that was kind of my family. I mean, it had its own stuff like families do, but it was body and sex positive. So I, went to school, went to college. Like I said, I did my teens and my 20s down in Southern California and really wanted to be a junior high and high school teacher. That's kind of where I wanted to start out. And so I started out there, but it was with working with kids that I started to realize what was happening at home for them was really impacting their ability to learn. And I thought, how can I intervene at that level to help free kids up to just be able to grow and learn and be? So I ended up going back to school, moved back to Washington, and went and got a degree in marriage and family therapy. And I don't know, a year or two after I graduated, I was asked to teach in the program I had just graduated from. So I started teaching in it. And one of the courses that they asked me to teach was the human sexuality course, which is a required graduate course for licensure. None of the other professors wanted to teach it. And I was like, yeah, I'm totally game. Like that to me is like my funnest class. Like just, yeah. But I was like, why aren't they jumping at it? Like, I just didn't understand why the other teachers, it took me a while. And it was actually my students and some of my clients that really taught me why people were shying away from sexuality so much. The combination of spending my adolescence in the 60s and 70s and then growing up in the home that I did just didn't give me an accurate pulse on what had been happening in the United States post 1980 and abstinence only and all of that. And so it was in that process of teaching that I became really aware of the impact of sexual shame and started becoming really interested in doing research around it and understanding it and then speaking about it, because I was dealing with students and clients that were dealing with symptomology that looked exactly like somebody who had been sexually abused as a child, but they had not experienced it in the traditional sense. And I thought, no way does the church know this is happening. It just doesn't know. And so that's when I started, working in that. And then I went back and got my PhD in clinical sexology, and took 11 years to write the book you have in your hands. Yeah. So.
Yes, which everybody, this is Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, subtitle, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy. Yeah. So you, in your practice, started getting young people. And you, by the way, you were in a Christian college, right?
I was, but I was teaching in a graduate school. So It was a little less, I don't know. I mean, people certainly could be of any faith and orientation or tradition to come into our graduate school, in part because we were accredited and we had to prove that we were open and affirming, even if the school was not. Our department had to be. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Mm-hmm. But you were getting Christian kids.
Some, yeah.
In your counseling practice, right? Who had grown up in very conservative Christian sexual ethics.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, I probably had 40 to 50% of my students who had that background and the others that did not.
Okay.
So it was about a split like that. But there also was not this as much of a difference between those two as they would write papers about growing up and sexuality, because I'd ask them to write their sexual autobiography and to really reflect on what legacy did they inherit? Is that a legacy that they want? And all of this. And there wasn't a huge difference between the two. This was part of what baffled me. I couldn't figure out why I was seeing so much shame, self-hatred, disgust, feeling like perverts, seeing it from so many of my students. And what I realized is I was hitting this was around the year 2000. I started teaching the class in 92. I was hitting this convergence of abstinence-only education across the United States, which was religious education.
Right.
And then kids who also were maybe in youth groups, et cetera, So both of them were getting this. It just would be usually a little bit heavier for those kids, not just those kids who were religious, but those kids that were really earnest or really anxious, just by nature. They're the ones that absorbed this stuff, hook, line, and sinker.
Just nailed me right there. I've got anxiety disorder, and once I came to Jesus, I was all in, thoroughly committed. And one of my observations, just as pastoring in this evangelical world for decades, is that those of us who took it most seriously almost are most harmed by it, almost the sex-based side of it.
Oh, I would say absolutely. Across the board.
I blew it off and said, that's stupid.
Yeah. There's a resiliency that they had, right? That for whatever reason that they were able to be like, I don't think that, I don't believe that, that's hogwash, whatever. That was a kind of protection. But the kids that were earnest and really anxious, man, they took it in all the way. And it manifests in their body. Like their body often is like, they've got erectile dysfunction, they've got sexual pelvic floor pain, all kinds of things. Like their whole being took it in. Whole being took it in. And I had never seen that in people that young, in their 20s and 30s, and I worked in, I also did a lot of stuff in medical family therapy. So I had a faculty appointment in family medicine at the University of Washington. So my doctors were seeing it too, and we were all scratching our heads at the beginning, like, what is going on here? So yeah, it was big.
So I'm gonna locate myself personally on this based thing, and then we'll roll from there. Because so I came to Christ in 1977. I was a shy kid. I was a virgin. I would have wanted to have had sex, because I was that age, right? And pornography back then was magazines, so we'd sneak looks, and, it's like, oh man. And then I came to Christ, and then I was absorbing, and my parents weren't super rigid, but they just didn't talk about it. Right. So most of what I absorbed was from the Southern Baptist church world. And I would maybe call it the pre-purity culture. If you locate the 90s as the purity culture, but I'm coming to Jesus in the conservative Southern Baptist world in the late 70s and 80s. I go to Baylor. Okay. I remember Josh McDowell came to my chapel, and he published Why Wait in the 90s.
Yeah.
He was talking about it in the early 80s.
Yes.
I remember at chapel him talking about why wait and all the reasons wait. And if you wait, then you'll have great sex, maximum sex. And I'm like, oh, perfect. Well, then
sign me up.
So I was like, oh, I'm all in, and I'll have the best sex in the world if I just wait. Right. And I would say that the ethic that I absorbed and held on to as hard as I could was this. It was God made sex. And if you're in a heterosexual marriage, you can do it, and thinking, right, as sex is intercourse, right? Not just all of the sexuality that you talk about, but located on there. God made sex. If you're in a heterosexual marriage, you can do it. But if you're not in a heterosexual marriage, you can't do it, and you can't think about it.
Right.
Because Jesus said, don't lust. And the way that got interpreted to me as a young teenager was you should think about sex. You shouldn't even have sexual thoughts.
No sexual wants either.
So I spent the rest of my life trying to hold on to that and kill any sexual drive or thought or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And now that I've learned so much, like I'm in mindful meditation, I'm doing a 2-year training with Tara Brock and Jack Kornfield, and what you resist. And I realize now my whole approach to suppressing my human sexuality backfired really in a lot.
Yeah, sure.
Didn't work, right?
Yeah.
Tried hard. I'm a very self-disciplined person. And I tried hard, but, and then as a pastor, I realized like that ethic was, most of us didn't live up to it. Right. So I tried to I say this now, and pardon my crassness, but I said, I try to wrap that ethic up with as much grace as I could. But now I would say in the end, it was just a turd.
Yeah, right. Not worth wrapping up.
But so I feel like I tried to hold an ideal, but then give grace for us all falling short. But I realized that I propagated the shame that I inherited, even as a pastor of a huge church. Right?
Yeah.
So it hurt me. I think it hurt the LGBTQ community. I think it hurt heterosexual. I think all people have suffered from this shame-based sexual ethic that almost denies, like you point out, the body and who we are as human beings, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And started seeing kids, and then Joshua Harris came out in the 90s with I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And I was trying to reach people outside the church. So people in my church who were homeschooling their kids and trying to keep their kids, giving them purity rings and all that. And then I had the people we were reaching from outside the church who were just hoping their kids used a condom.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Anyway, you started seeing these people coming in with the baggage that I had, this shame ethic. And what did you see? What did you observe? Give me.
Yeah. Well, there was
putting a puzzle together.
Yeah. Well, there was so much self-flagellation, self-hatred in their writing and when I would sit with them and talk to them, and so little real understanding of what's developmentally common. Well, what's developmentally common that kids, are curious about at 2 and 4 and 6 and 8 and 10 and 12, all the way, like the human stuff. They had no clue. So I eventually started just piecing together that some major shift had happened in culture. And I really had to do a lot of work to come to understand what happened, because it was on the socio-political level. It wasn't just on the religious level, because we have to understand that there was a merging of church and state in 1980, right? So the Southern Baptist Church had been pro Roe v. Wade until 1979. right?
Yeah, people don't know that,
1980.
by the way.
No, they don't know that.
Frank Schaefer, I interviewed Frank
I love Frank.
But he's brought that out really well, right?
Yeah.
But don't realize that.
No, they don't. And they went after abortion because they could no longer get funding in Christian schools for segregation. And that's what they had been doing and had been kind of pumping. Well, also pre 1980, the evangelical world, including the Southern Baptist Church, was very apolitical, was not very political. Well, then there started to be this shift that happened. They got Reagan into office. He was the puppet, right? They started getting these people like Jerry Falwell and whatever to be spokespersons for what the religious right wanted. Mm-hmm. And the moral majority and religious right became a political arm of the Republican Party. This was to advance capitalism. This had nothing to do with family values, but this is what happened. And they dropped regulations on the banks. They dropped regulations on media, right? So meanwhile, what's also happening is we have an influx of video games. This is now new. We then have the internet, then that's new. And then we have social media that climbs on board. So meanwhile, when the media has now no regulations, it can say and do anything that makes money for the stockholders. Now we have all kinds of an increase of violence against women. So this is what's happening in culture. This is really important to understand because at the same time, we've withdrawn sex education. We've withdrawn sex research in the United States. We've inputted abstinence education, which is 80% medically inaccurate. It's really about scaring people.
Yeah,
sex is dangerous. It's going to kill you.
Put that in quotes. Say it again. 80%.
80%
inaccurate.
Of medically inaccurate. Right now,
curriculum.
The curriculum itself has been researched, right? 80% medically inaccurate. It was really about scaring people, right? Sex is dangerous. It will kill you because remember, 1980, AIDS hit the East Coast, 85 West Coast, right? We had a real reaction to second wave feminism, and then we had an economic downturn. So we had a very frightened public, perfect in the hands of people with power, right? To get them all riled up. And that's exactly what happened. So now kids they're not getting sex education at home. There's much more of a push to start, make money, get that career, blah, 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 and it becomes harder for people to get ahead. So there's less child development information in the fore for people, less sex education, but the media is giving us all kinds of quote unquote education on people are to use each other. Exploitation is the name of the game, right? Women are there for men's pleasure. Women are getting it too. It's just becomes this huge mess. Then we wonder, how did we get to where we are now, where we have such a rape culture? Well, this is what was happening. This is what was unfolding beginning in 1980. And it began to hit a kind of a peak in the early 90s. Which is what you're seeing and talking about, right? Yeah. Where really the True Love Waits thing, Josh's book, Josh was, and I've said this, I've actually even written and talked to him before, but he was a 21-year-old. He was a pawn in the hands of men who knew better.
You think Josh McDowell was a pawn?
Oh, not Josh. I'm sorry, not Josh McDowell. Joshua Harris.
Josh Harris, yeah. But
Josh Harris was a pawn. Yeah, not Josh McDowell. He was older.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. No, but
Josh Harris definitely a pawn, and he's talking about that now. I think, right?
I hope so. I don't know. I've not heard an interview where he has spoken about lots of things for sure, which is nice. But
with Pete Enns on the Bible from people, and it was it was really good actually. I mean, went into how it was a marketing thing from the big
it was. It absolutely was.
Poster child, and he's
poster child. Yeah. I wrote a blog post on it. This was back in 2016 or 17, and when he got, people started coming after him around, he got interviewed by NPR, and I'm like, hey, everybody, you need to understand your history. Josh was 21. Mm-hmm. He is not. Feel free to hold him accountable for the things that his book did, but understand who he was in the bigger system, the bigger oppressive system that was going on, So, yeah. Anyway, it's it's a lot.
Yeah. And it really, so let's contrast quickly. Because then I want to dive into your model for healing sexual shame, which
Okay.
name AIM thing. And then I love the way those 2 chapters where you did the anatomy of intimacy and then the practice of intimacy. I thought that was really helpful for me, even to be able to, sort of granulate all of those expressions of sexuality. That kind of what it did for me is like, oh, cool. There's this whole world of play.
Yes.
That isn't just centered around intercourse, right?
So, right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and I think it begs the question, I think, what's the purpose of sex?
Mm-hmm.
What's the purpose, right? Because if you can have bad intercourse, I don't think that's the purpose. And a lot of people do really bad transactional intercourse, like one person really wants the heart of the other person and the other person's like, I don't want to be here. And they're doing it anyway. Yeah. And they both don't get what they need and want. And that's not the purpose, I'm always blowing that up.
Or that can
absolutely.
That can happen in any sexual.
Oh, yeah. It happens so much in marriage. I got to tell you, it fills sex therapist offices.
Yep. But contrast, in your view, shame, what you might call shame-based sexual ethics. And then I, in my world, I called it grace-based sexual ethics, but I like your term. I think you would use sex-positive sexual ethics. So contrast those 2 for me.
Yeah.
Sexual versus sex-positive sexual ethics.
A negative sex ethic is one that sees the body as bad, the body's natural functions as bad, as dangerous, not just bad, but really like frightening, scary. Sexual desire as bad, right? So just your want for connection and to share connection and pleasure, that's bad. And so it leaves people juxtaposed to themselves. Like they can't see this, for lots of people, it feels powerful. It feels like this powerful, like not just drive to move through your arousal cycle, but drive to bond, drive to really connect with somebody, right? And it alienates you from that delicious part of yourself, really, and a part that's important to understand. And this is why I went into some of the Jewish teaching in the book, because they've got some beautiful positive things in there. But when you see desire as really the heart of God within you, it's like at your first breath at birth, you're breathing in the in spirit of God. And the way that moves in and out of your body all the time is through your desires. I want to go play with my kids, or I want to go do this, or I want to do that. Now, does all desire good? Well, the ethic in desire is that you want desire to serve love and justice. So serve love and justice for you, serve love and justice for someone else.
Right.
And so you just are asked to examine before you leap, is that the way I'm going about honoring this desire or honoring this want, right? Does it make more good in the world, right? Kind of a thing. But the power of it is what drives all our innovation. It drives our connection. It drives our play. It drives our fun, our memory. So much of what's good in life comes from our desire to do something that brings us joy, right? So this is seen as bad too. So all of that is part of what I think of as sex negativity. Sex positivity is basically kind of the opposite of that. It sees the body as purposeful and important and worth understanding and knowing. It sees desire as good, but asks you to manage it so that you have a sense of accountability to yourself and to anybody else. And so it allows you to have curiosity, really wide open curiosity about, well, what is my body like and how does it work? And how does it change over time? And what do I like and what don't I like? And, what opens me up and what closes me down? And how do I have voice about that? And how do I respect the voices of others about what they feel about themselves? And so from my curiosity, I learn all kinds of habits and disciplines of how to manage myself and how to be in intimate relationship with others, which is just, I think, part of the bonding. We are social creatures, and part of the bonding that we want to do is to really just connect with others, right? In a really delightful way. When we shut it all down, then everything goes underground.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And when it goes underground, then there's no ethic in the underground except for whatever is the ethic of the culture that you live in.
Mm.
And so then we wonder why people find themselves in situations they don't want to be in, because they're swimming in a place without any awareness, knowledge, ethics, conversation, words, even to enter into it, right? They're just, I'm supposed to know, so I'm just going to pretend I know, and we see people getting hurt all the time. What we don't talk about is sexuality, just like love, can be also remarkably healing when it's done in the context of mindfulness about me and mindfulness about you.
Yeah.
And conversation and all of that. It can be like you can feel ushered into a liminal space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and I wish we had churches that taught that.
I'm going to try. I'm trying to, do better. As Maya Angelou said, when you know better, do better, right?
Do better. That's right.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
And I'm growing, I'm healing myself. So I'm curious, like if you think about all the, domestic violence, I mean, the stats on women who have experienced different types of abuse, it's the numbers are just massive, right?
Staggering.
And then you mentioned, you said something earlier that I wanted you to kind of unpack just a little bit. You said that for some, I guess men or women, but maybe, I don't know, you tell me if it's men and women or one or the other, or more percentage of one or the other, that grow up in these really shame-based sexual ethic cultures, that even though they might not have experienced sexual abuse, it presents itself like sexual abuse. Can you unpack that a little bit? Because even me as a pastor who was counseling, lots of people with not as much sophistication as you have now, right? I wish I could backwards and redo all those, but you said it presents almost similarly to victims of sexual abuse. Unpack that for me a little bit.
Yeah.
Witness.
So what you often see in somebody who's experienced sexual abuse as a child is they feel bad to the core. If they feel like it's their fault, that they had done something that made this happen, and they feel deeply unworthy of love and belonging. They own it all. Okay. Even though they don't understand that it was somebody who had power over them and had choice over their bodies, and that they couldn't have defended themselves from anyway. Or maybe was the person who was feeding them, giving them a place to stay. I mean, was a parent or grandparent or whatever, they had no choice, but they don't see it that way. They see it as, this happened because I'm bad. I am bad. I'm bad. And that's and then it can sometimes manifest in physical kinds of things, like pelvic pain, erectile dysfunction, chronic pain, just all kinds of things. Like the body keeps score, as we know now, right, from the literature, right?
Yeah.
So really, what you have, I think, is you have kids that are just deeply hurt. Now, the reason that kids who grew up in purity culture were showing up with this too was, and I'm going to share with you a definition of what sexual shame is in a minute, just so that you can see how pervasive it is. But just imagine for a minute, because I've come to a place where I believe in the United States, sexual shame is our first shame. And that is because imagine that you are in a home, religious or not, but where parents believe to their core that sex and sexuality and bodies and all that stuff. It's dangerous. Like it's plain old dangerous. It's going to ruin your life, right? If you somehow end up not knowing how to contain it, you're going to end up getting hurt out there in the world. And I don't want that for you, right? So you have a year-old child whose hand finally isn't clobbering them in the face. They finally can now reach out and grab something. And sometime right around that age, when they're getting their diapers changed or they're in the tub, they're going to find their genitals. And that is going to be a fabulous day for them, but not for their caregiver, who will likely yell, slap their hand away, get a real grimace look on their face, like something really bad has happened. Let's go, oh, yucky, dirty, don't, right? Now, a child does not log their memories really regularly until they're about 5, right? Now, they may have a few from before, but what we see, generally speaking, is that when people tell stories of getting in trouble around sex or sexuality, it's, I was playing doctor and I was 5. But I want you to know that from 1 to 5, they're finding their genitals every day once they start to realize it's attached to their body. Because it's such a wonderful part of our body. I mean, it's right. I mean, I just think, that makes me believe in God all on its own, because it's like, it's such an incredible thing that we have our own ability to comfort ourselves, And so kids are doing that. And it is a comforting thing. It's like the inside of their bunny's ear, because it just feels good. Yeah. And they're getting in trouble and trouble and trouble and trouble and trouble. And so what are they doing with that? Deep down inside, they're just being them. They're being perfectly their age. So all they can think is something must be fundamentally wrong with me because I keep getting in trouble for just being me. Yeah. Over and over and over and over. And this is, they're little. This is pre-verbal. Yep. They're little, right? So now we're touching on the very beginning of body curiosity, right? Right at 1. And so at 2 and 3, when they start figuring out, like, they start noticing gender differences, and maybe they're just like, they match, like they were born with female parts and they feel like a girl, or they were born with male parts and they feel like a boy. And everybody's celebrating that. Great. But heaven forbid you're born with male parts and you feel like a girl and you want to wear your sister's skirts and put all the sequins on and everything. People start flipping out on you, right? And if that child has a strong personality and really tries to be seen, known, loved, and accepted by you, and you can't do it, they're going to be suicidal by 10. This is just development, right? And, we have 3, 4%, 5% of kids that this is true for them, right? Yeah. So I just want you to see that we are hurting the development of the sexuality, not once at age 10 by being molested by somebody outside the family or whatever, but actually over and over and over and over and over and over again. And we're just heaping more on there because as they get older, right, parents are signing them out of the sexuality teaching that might be just puberty. Oh, you can't do that. That's not good. That's dangerous. So now you're having to tell your friends, well, I can't go. My parents don't want me to go, right? It becomes just more. But meanwhile, we've got this highly eroticized, highly violent, highly consumer-based sexuality that's being sold on the media, whether it's movies, video games, right? Whatever, online. We see violence and sexuality blending. Okay. So anyway, that's just part of how it's going.
That a sexual abuse victim internalizes and experiences is very similar and presents later in life as a person who just grows up always being shamed about their sexuality.
Right. Because they're always getting in trouble for it.
Right.
And so they don't
shame impact almost.
Right. Exactly. So let me, we didn't have an research-based operational definition of sexual shame until 2017. It actually came out a month after Sex, God, and the Conservative Church was published.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So it's not in the book. It is. I did put it in the audio version of the book, though.
Okay.
But it's not in the book. But I want to read it to you because I had a young woman come to me who was getting her PhD, and she said, I've been following your work. I really want to study religious sexual shame and the impact of that. But when I got into the literature, there was nothing on sexual shame. So I have to start there. And I'm like, thank you. And I would appreciate that. Would be great. And trust me, people will build on your work, all over the country because this is becoming an issue. So anyway, she interviewed many, many people, and the vast majority of them did not come from a religious background. But I want you to listen to this definition because it's so powerful. Sexual shame is a visceral feeling. So in your body, right? It's in your body, a visceral feeling of humiliation and disgust toward one's own body and identity as a sexual being, and a belief of being abnormal, inferior, and unworthy. This feeling can be internalized, but it also manifests in interpersonal relationships, so between you and someone else. And this is, of course, where it begins with children, right? Having a negative impact, get this, on trust, communication, and physical and emotional intimacy. I don't know how you hurt someone more if you're not hitting them at all of those places. I mean, this is just what's so powerful about sexual shame and why it's so debilitating. Sexual shame develops across the lifespan, like I was explaining, into interactions with interpersonal relationships. But then we add one's culture and society, and it creates a subsequent critical self-appraisal. In other words, you have that inner critic that just gets going. So we know, for example, that 6-year-olds in the United States, 50% of them are already modifying their diet because they've come to understand that they are not okay the way they are. 2/3 of 9-year-olds, 90% of 15-year-olds, right? So this is how culture plays into the I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, right? And then it goes on to say there is also a fear and uncertainty related to one's power or right to make decisions, including safety decisions related to sexual encounters, along with an internalized judgment toward one's own sexual desire. So that's from Dr. Noel Clarke's PhD dissertation. What that last piece reminds me of, there's a couple of really remarkable books written by Peggy Ornstein. One's called Girls and Sex and one's called Boys and Sex. In Girls and Sex, she interviewed about 80 girls, 15 to 22. And she said, they felt confident and competent in so many areas of their life until they got ready to go out. And then they were putting down 3, 4, and 5 shots of hard liquor because they didn't know if they could keep themselves safe or if they had the right to. And again, in Peggy's work, the vast majority of them were not from religious backgrounds. So what's important to understand is how widespread sexual shame is across our culture because we've been selling it now for over 40 years.
It's interesting because, I'm so steeped in the religious shame culture, right? That, at times you meet other people who didn't grow up in that and you feel like, oh, well, it feels like they're more healthy sexually sometimes.
Yeah. A lot of times. Yeah. Oh yeah. Sure. If you grew up in a home that's just silent, but not silent and shaming, you are going to be probably have less baggage.
No, and I had this, I remember as a teenager trying to find literature, about this stuff. Like, is it okay to masturbate? Like it never really got talked about that loud, but if it did, it was no, because it was lust and Jesus said, don't lust. Right. So
right.
I remember searching, like I'm like 17, 18, 19 years old, trying to figure out if it's okay to masturbate as a Christian,
Oh, yeah.
And I remember finding one book by a guy named Walter Trobisch, who kind of gave maybe a slight concession, but it just was so weak that I didn't adopt it. So I just spent the rest of my life thinking, all right, battling battling, but never having an outlet and always feeling shame about my
Yeah.
drive. And then you think, oh, marriage will solve all of it. And then it, and then you, and then it doesn't,
I
and
know.
then and then it's just like, oh my God. And, so I had this whole, like, until I really blew up and melted down at 5 years ago, I lived in that sexual shame.
Yeah.
My,
Yes. Yes.
my whole experience. And you're just like,
Yeah.
crap.
I know. And it's such a beautiful part of you,
Right.
really such a vibrant, beautiful part. And
Yeah.
that's why I would cry when I would read these things,
Yeah.
and I'd end up in my chair's office just crying, saying, they're getting hurt in the most tender, sweetest place in them.
Yeah.
It's just killing me. Yeah.
And like Josh McDowell, and he would pile on the, man, if you do these things before marriage, then it's just going to ruin your life. You know what I mean? And I'm curious what the research shows about premarital sex. Does it screw people up like?
No. And the thing is, Josh knew better too. I mean, if he stopped and thought about it, he would know better, because chances are he did his own kind of things too, but he just thought it would be better if everybody else didn't do that.
The percent
It's
Southern Baptist pastors that I know that actually waited till they got married is very small.
That's right.
Right.
It's about 12% in the general public, actually.
They taught it, they held on to it, they spread.
Yeah, sure.
And then what you don't realize is that if it's sometimes, they don't talk about what's going on behind the scenes in their marriage. So
that's right. And there's often a lot.
Like me, people would have probably thought, oh, Fred's got a great marriage. You know what I'm saying? Until it blows up. And then the whole world, I was on the front page of the Kansas City Star as a,
oh, babe,
like a church pastor, go, and it's just like, oh my
God.
So humiliating.
Yeah.
But then everybody wasn't good.
Well, and then they have a really good time, crucifying you too, even though they're doing all the same stuff.
And then the most shameful thing in my life is broadcast to the world. And then you literally don't want to live anymore. I mean, I went through my year 2019 was just like, I just don't even want to live. This is too
painful.
Too painful. Yeah. And
absolutely.
And I've, you rethink this thing. And I love the way, by the way, we won't dive into this, but I love the way in your book, how you showed how the Hebrew tradition had a lot of sex positive messages in it. And then as it got filtered through asceticism, early Christianity, Constantine and Augustine.
That's right.
Then it got, turned into this crazy shame-based sexual ethic that didn't come from the Hebrew tradition.
It did not. No, it did not. And nor could you craft it from Jesus' ministry either. Jesus' ministry wouldn't be one where deny yourself. And then if you don't deny yourself, blame women. I mean, Jesus would never have endorsed that way of being, but then that was the sexual ethic that emerged in the 4th century.
Yeah, you're right.
And still is there today.
I think so. 100%.
Yeah.
I still have evangelical pastor friends who are still propagating that kind of stuff,
I know. Yes, I do.
Wow. Oh boy.
Yeah. There's a lot of pain. But you asked a really good question. You asked a question. Well, so what about people who have sex before marriage, right? Here are the things that we know. What we know is if a child has sex, usually pre 14, 15, they often just don't know enough yet to set up that experience in a way that they can feel good about it later, right? Because they're just still so young, right? And so a lot of people, even if they have an okay experience at that age, they'll say, I just wish I was a little older, because I was still pretty little. So you'll hear that. Once people are like 15, 16, 17, if they have a relationship with somebody they deeply care about, they feel cared about, they feel like they had choice in what happened in the matter, and it was a loving relationship, they'll often, and it doesn't, religious or not, they'll often describe that as a sweet memory.
Mm.
And I had so many Christian kids that would say, I know I should feel guilty about that, but I don't.
Right.
It was really, they would write this. It really was a sweet relationship, right?
Yeah.
If people have sexual relationships that feel exploitive in any way, doesn't matter their age, and they can be married, they do not like it, because to be exploited is not to be loved and cared for.
Yeah.
It's to be taken advantage of, right? And so exploitation, whether it occurs for the 16-year-old or the 56-year-old, it doesn't feel good. And it doesn't feel good because of exploitation, not because it happened outside of marriage. Because trust me, this stuff happens inside of marriage all the time. Right. There are so many couples that are doing sex out of obligation.
Yep.
One or both of them doesn't really want to be doing it the way they are.
Yes.
And that's exploitation.
Oh.
There is not consent in there, but they don't feel like they could talk about it, because if they talk about it, their partner will flip.
Right. Right. Yeah. Believe me. I don't want to go too personal here, but no, that's true. It's true. And, through counseling, I counseled a lot of couples, and it was so fascinating. Yeah. So unhealthy sexual habits and
right.
Marriage as much as outside of marriage, probably. What do you think? I don't know.
Well, honestly, I think as consent and the conversation about consent increases, and people have more and more understanding, and then understand that actually talking about what you feel up for is a really important thing to do in order to have a good experience. And that sex isn't penis and vagina intercourse. That's not, we want to have good sexual experiences. So let's design something together that's about connection and pleasure that we both fill up for. And then people are having good experiences. Now they can do that inside and outside of marriage as adults and have really good experiences. I would love to see us move toward that, but we have to start with some sex education.
Yeah.
So many people just don't there's so much they don't understand about themselves and others.
I want to I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, because I want to get to your framework for healing sexual shame. But, so in this last 5 years of my life, I've tried to soak in so many different kinds of things and perspective.
Yeah.
I've read Ethical Slut. I've read, I can certainly. I remember listening to Tim Ferriss interview the top female sex provider in Nevada at the Bunny Ranch. He did a half hour.
Sex worker.
Yeah. She has a master's degree in sex therapy. She was brilliant. And it was so fascinating to hear her talk about, she's testified before Congress about her work and the healthy side of it.
That's right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Like in growing up how I did and being a pastor, I'm like, wow, this is fascinating.
Yeah. That's right. No, people don't understand sex work.
Yeah.
I mean, people think sex work's all trafficking, and the traffic part of sex work is something we do need to be concerned about. But there are lots of people that are out doing sex work, and it's their choice in their way and no exploitation at all. And they're actually doing remarkable healing work out in the world.
Isn't that fascinating? That'll blow an evangelical mind, right?
Mine. I know. I know it does. And in 2015, I started running an institute to train pastors, therapists, physicians, educators in sexual health and understanding your sexual bias. I've since sold it, but on that website, I have an interview with a past sex worker who grew up Jewish. She was a sex worker for several years. It was in the act of helping her clients love themselves just by extending grace and love to them that she ended up becoming a Christian, because she could see how love and grace could transform the human heart. So I interviewed her because I'm like, your story needs to be told, because people do not know that that is a huge piece of what sex workers do in the world, is they help people who don't feel seen, known, loved, and accepted feel seen, known, loved, and accepted, and they get touched. That's the minor part, actually, of what happens.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, I was even listening to an interview with a female, like porn star who was talking about how they have a list of things they go over that they won't do. Like they set their boundaries right up front.
Absolutely. Right up front.
And what they enjoy, what they don't enjoy, and all that kind of stuff. And this was the one I was listening to was funny because they said, I wish we would do that in our personal world.
Yes.
Because,
yes.
You're negotiating based on your own preferences and boundaries and stuff like that. And how do you discover that? If you think sex and every sexual thought and desire and pleasure and is evil until you get married, and then all of a sudden you're married, but you've never ever talked about it. You've never explored it. You don't know what you're doing. You felt guilty if you did explore it.
Right. Yes.
Right. And this is
it sets people up for failure. Yeah, I know. I mean, you start to lay it out and you're like, wait a minute, we are setting people up for failure. What other area of our lives do we raise our children and say, there's something really important that you're going to want to be involved in later in life, but we're not going to teach you anything about it. And in fact, if you learn about it all, that will be bad for you. That could ruin your future. What? And then 16, we hand them keys to a car?
Yeah.
Or 20, we hand them keys to a plane and we expect them to be safe? I mean, it's absolutely asinine.
It is.
But that's what we do.
It's how.
And the opposite is true. When you raise children to give them the information along the way, you'd be surprised. They're confident. They have voice. They know where they begin and end. They know what exploitation looks like. They call BS on things that are happening out there. They are like, yeah, I'm not really interested in being involved with somebody because kids are too young and immature. I'm going to wait until I actually meet somebody who's mature and worth my time. Maybe college, we'll see. Okay. So they get involved with sex later because they know what they want. I mean, they've been in conversation about relationships and how you want to be treated and how you don't want to be treated and how somebody's treating you well. And I mean, all the things.
Yep. So fascinating. So let's talk about how do we heal this shame?
Yeah.
You have the 4. So why don't you just give us your, you have frame, claim, name, and aim.
Right. And I call this the model for healing sexual shame. So healing the mess. A model for erasing sexual shame, MESS. So frame, name, claim, and aim. So frame is
let the healing begin.
Let the healing begin. So start by getting yourself a frame or a scaffolding of sex education. There's some fabulous books out there, websites. Even when we can talk another time about Shameless Parenting book that I wrote. But part of that is actually to help both people who are raising kids not do to their kids what was done to them, but also to help them reparent themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, so if it started young with you, go get the books for the birth to 2-year-olds and read them out loud. Like read them because they're going to heal your insides, and go to the 2 to 4-year-old stuff and then read that, and reparent yourself, love on yourself and ask yourself, how would my life have been different if somebody would have read this to me or talked to me about that? And let your body go, oh gosh, that's what I needed, right? So that's what frame is. Get yourself that scaffolding of sex education. Claim your body as good. Your body is good. We live in a world that drives its economy on you feeling crappy about yourself, how you look and how you are, right? And yet, who wants to go to their deathbed and realize that they spent the bulk of their life hating themselves and hating their body, and now life is short? And really, all our body is the pen that writes the poetry of our life. I get to love with my body. I get to speak with my body. I get to dance with my body. I get to eat delicious food with my body. Who cares if it's 40 pounds overweight or it's whatever. Who cares? If I get to get up in the morning and I'm mostly out of pain, yay, it's a good day. So we have to work to claim our body back from how culture's been trying to teach us. Name is, so we've got frame, claim, name. Point, yeah.
That's a part of my healing has been the mindful meditation practice. And they start right off with the mind-body split.
Yeah.
Part of the meditation practice is to actually have an embodied spirituality meditation practice and the self-compassion part. So I really didn't learn self-care, self-compassion from my evangelical tradition. Mm-hmm. I learned self-denial and applied it in many wrong ways to where I was just really just suppressing my own humanity and sexuality. And so, and then have a harsh inner critic, right? So to learn self-care, self-compassion in the body and to enter into my body with kindness, with curiosity, with openness, with non-judgment, that's been huge for me, right?
I'll bet it is for so many people. Yeah. It's so many people that's healing, and it's a practice. Like you say, it's a practice. We've got to do it because we're literally rewiring our brain. And that's why we've got to do it over and over and over again. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then, so that's claim, and name is tell your story. Find a compassionate other, an empathic other, or a group of friends, group of empathic people. Read Sex, God, in the Conservative Church and just talk, every half chapter or whatever. Start to tell your story. Here's what it was like in my home. Here's what it was like in my high school. Here's what it was like in my junior high. Here's what it was like when I started dating. What you're going to find is that you are not alone. So many people carry these secrets inside them. I have talked about this stuff across the country, and I would say 95% of the audiences I've talked to would say they grew up in a home that was silent or silent and shaming. So you are not alone. So trust me. So as you do these things, which is a practice, as you frame, as you learn, as you claim your body is good, as you tell your story and find people who can see you, as you do that, what you will end up doing is you'll end up aiming for a whole new sexual ethic for yourself, a whole new legacy for yourself. And you can stop the ethic that you were raised in, that's probably generations old. You could stop it right there with you. And for everybody, all the learning you do from then on out and all the young people that you influence, it's now something entirely different. It's informed. There's awareness, there's kindness, there's compassion, and there's celebration around our humanity, like you were talking about.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. One of my therapists, the two therapy models that helped me the most were IFS, internal family systems. Richards.
Yeah. Richards. Yeah.
I actually interviewed a guy from Claremont School of Theology who's a good friend of Richard Schwartz.
Dix. Yeah.
On my accounts. And then the other one was DBT, Marshall Linehan's dialectical behavior therapy. And the lady that started DBT here in Kansas City, I've interviewed her, and she was actually one of my therapists. And she was the one that just said, you've got to tell your story to people who love you anyway, because I was so ashamed of my story.
Right.
So that's the only way to get healed from shame is to just start your story and do it with people who will love you. And when they didn't even want to say it to people, right?
Yeah, right. Yes.
So, so then I loved the way you did the chapter on anatomy of intimacy. You give 7, and I can't remember who the person that originated those 7 continuum.
Yeah, Lana Walker, and I can't remember her husband's name, but they had a book and ran some retreats. Yeah. Yeah,
but it was like tell me if I'm how I received it when I read it.
Yeah.
Kind of granulated out sexuality in a lot of different ways and kind of gave you here's the positive side of this on a spectrum, and here's the negative side. So like you had intimacy of body, illness on the other side, health and well-being. You had sensuality on the one side, pain, and the other side, pleasure, which by the way, about the pleasure, all pleasure was almost had to be evil, and then you desire the rejection side or the sexual energy side, your heart, the abandonment side, the love side, the trust, betrayal, honesty, aesthetic, which I love the aesthetic, shame, beauty, gratitude, creativity, and then the ecstatic, the cynicism, and then like union. That kind of a dynamic.
Right. Yeah. That ineffable experience you can't put words to.
So it gave me like this sense of granulated, like a beautiful spectrum of play with our sexuality.
Yes.
And then you gave these practices of intimacy that I thought would just be so fun if you had a partner that you could just talk through and play through all of those kind of things. It's like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
One of my things is to counter my shame. Like one of the things I've always desired is to be naked and unashamed.
Yes.
That kind of brought that out in a beautiful way. Is how can we live with our nakedness, our vulnerability, the sexuality, and yet in a beautiful way that's not filled with shame.
As soon as that shame goes away,
life,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a liberation there. And it's not to say that there aren't boundaries. Together, you create boundaries, right? So people will be like, oh, people are going to go wild. I remember I had a theology prof go like, Tina, you listen to you talk and you think you're just going to let people go wild. And I'm like, yeah, actually, wild is kind of what already is happening. But when people are designing something for themselves, what they want, and they feel free to do that with somebody else, they put together something that they actually want. So it has boundaries. I don't feel like doing anything that's penetrative. I want to do something in water. You're like, people are designing what they want. And of course it's contained. And because it's contained, there's freedom. Right. Because it's contained. Yeah.
At least 50 shades of gray or more, So I'm
trust me, there's more. There's a lot more. I loved learning about it. I love meeting people who, like you were talking about, what you were, learning from that, I think it was a sex worker that you were talking about.
Not her name, but it's a Tim Ferriss interview that
Tim Ferriss, right, did the interview. Well,
it's really good.
Yeah, I'll bet it was. I love Tim's interviews anyway. They're pretty good. But anyway, if you meet anybody who identifies as somebody who likes kink, whatever it is, any different, and they're involved in a kink community in some, Kansas City is going to have a kink community. I mean, every major city does. What you're going to find when you talk to them is the kink community's had this right for years. You go to a new members class, you learn all the rules of the place. No substances are used. If you come to play, you have to sit and negotiate your entire scene before you start it. If in the middle of the scene, you get so hot and bothered, you want to do something different, and you say to your partner, I want to do this, your partner will say, great idea, not this time, because we didn't negotiate it ahead of time. We can do it next time. There's always a next time, right? And you stay within the boundaries of what you decided on. And then you take time when the scene is over to process together how it went. They call it aftercare. And this has been happening for years, hundreds of years, probably in the kink community. And just like what was said at,
you talk about your safe words ahead of time.
Oh, right? Everything. Yes. Everything. And this is what allows it to give you the liberation to have fun, because the container's been set. The way the vanilla people and straight people in particular do it out in the world is nothing is talked about. Nothing is known. Things start to happen and people don't know how to stop it. And substances are often involved.
Interesting.
And I would say that the assault rate for women is closer to 80%. Find me a woman over 30 who says who's been out in the world dating or seeing people, who says she's never had a sexual experience. that she didn't want.
Wow.
I have yet to meet one.
Wow.
They have at least one that they didn't want.
Interesting. Wow.
Yes.
And that would include married people.
Oh, absolutely. It's happening all the time in marriage.
Right.
Yes.
Oh.
And I would love for people to feel the freedom of, I know when I'm going to go play with my person, it's going to be fun and enjoyable. And what I want is cared about, and what they want is cared about. May not look like any other time we've done it before, but that's good because I don't like eating Cheerios for breakfast, lunch, and dinner anyway. So I like it to be a banquet of fun.
Yeah. Well, Tina, I would love it if you'd come back, and I haven't read the Shameless Parenting yet, but as I was trying to process my own reshaping of my sexual ethic, I even though I don't have kids, I tried to think about it through that lens. Like, how would I want to raise kids?
Yeah.
That they don't have the kind of shame that I carry,
Mm-hmm.
So I actually think a book like that can even help adults. So like when I read it, it'll help me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Come back and let me interview you again.
Yeah, let's do that, and really pay attention to how it spoke to you, because I would love to hear that from you.
Yeah. So give people, how can you've got a website, your book, your Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, you've got Shameless Parenting. What's the website? And then just give us a quick, what are you doing right now?
Okay. So my website is tinaschermersellers.com. Both books can be found on Amazon and probably other booksellers. If a bookseller doesn't have it, just ask them to order it for you. You can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Tina Shameless. And then what I'm doing right now, and there also is a baby Instagram, is I have started a organization for physicians, prescribers, and therapists who have gone on to get trained in psychedelic assisted therapy. The research is showing remarkable ability to heal trauma. At some point in a couple of years, I'll likely do a clinical trial on people with religious sexual trauma, specifically, because I don't know who else out there is curious about this like I am. But I'm really interested in supporting the professionals, the clinicians that are going to try to bring these medicines, these very sacred medicines, to people's lives and help them to heal faster than they're able to heal with just the kinds of therapies that we have right now. So that's what I'm about. And my tiny little Instagram is Inanna, INANNA _rising, RISING _PAT, which stands for psychedelic assisted therapy. And then I have a website that is inannarising.org. And you can go learn about it there.
And Inanna what is
so
it?
Inanna is a Mesopotamian goddess of love and justice.
Okay.
And so this is very much in honor of the sacred feminine.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Well, beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for being on the podcast. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. And man, share this with other people. This is such a vital, I just think our whole country needs this message. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Thanks for bringing it to the forefront and spending your life in this. Appreciate it.
Oh, sure. It's been a joy. Thanks for bringing me on, Fred. It was really fun.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.